You know, strength is something that we value across the board. But today, as we look at Paul's writings, we'll find that weakness actually creates a platform for God's grace and his power. Welcome to Westside.
You are always faithful. You will never leave. You are always faithful to me. Faithful to me. Faithful to me. Faithful to me.
Beginning in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, we see God creating a new kind of people, a community that belongs to him and to one another. It's this beautiful picture. And of course, we end up walking away from God, but God keeps pursuing us. We see this with Abraham. In Genesis chapter 12, God makes a covenant with Abraham and with all of Abraham's descendants. And this is what he says. This is the commitment that God makes to Abraham and to his descendants, that he would be their God and they would be his people. It's this beautiful community that's birthed out of God's love for us. But guess what happens? Yeah, we walk away from God again. It's kind of the story arc of the Bible, actually. But God is constantly patient. He's faithful. He keeps showing up even if we don't. He keeps drawing people to himself. And it's always in the context of community. Even when Jesus shows up on the scene, he gathers a group of people around him in community. And he launches what we now call the church. And it's filled with broken people. But God still pursues us, so much so that he sends himself to make a new covenant with us. And he gives this community one command, just one thing that he asks them to do in his name. And this is what it is: love each other as I have loved you. As I am in the Father, Jesus says, and you are in me, this community is formed and sustained in God's love and our love for one another. I love how the Apostle John describes this kind of community in his letters, 1 John, 2 John, and 3 John. In 1 John chapter 4, verse 7, this is what he writes: Dear friends, let us continue to love one another, for love comes from God. Anyone who loves is a child of God and knows God. But anyone who does not love does not know God, for God is love. God showed us how much he loved us by sending his one and only Son into the world so that we might have eternal life through him. This is real love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as a sacrifice to take away our sins. Dear friends, since God loved us that much, we surely ought to love each other. No one has ever seen God, but if we love each other, God lives in us, and his love is brought to full expression in us. It's almost like people see God, even an invisible God, through our love for one another. See, John is connecting this new covenant with the old covenant. It's God's love continuing to pursue us. It's not us pursuing God so much as it's his love pursuing us. It's out of his love that we ought to love one another, and his love is perfected in how we do that with each other. The first church lived this out. They loved one another. They gave to one another. It was like a preview community of what God wanted to do through his people throughout time, to share with one another, to encourage one another, to strengthen each other, to share each other's burdens. It's not an isolated, individualistic type of relationship that God calls us to. It's this beautiful, connected people who truly care for one another. And out of this great love for us and for each other, we serve and love the world around us just like Jesus did. I mean, the whole story of the Bible is God's pursuing love for us and then through us for the world he created. So I want you to consider doing two things today. Would you make two commitments? One, to receive God's love, and two, to give God's love. To welcome the love expressed through Jesus into your own life and through his people, and then to share that love with others today. So Lord, I pray to help us to be your people, called by your name, to love one another as we've been loved by you. Love you all. Have a great day.
My story of motherhood, it's had its ups and downs. I've had 6 children, but I only have 3 in my home because I've had 3 miscarriages, which has been the most heartbreaking experience of my life. But I also have 3 beautiful children that I'm so grateful for. And yet I had to wait for them until I was in my 30s because I didn't get married till later. And so I also had that experience of wanting to be a mother for a really long time. And I spent my whole 20s wishing and longing that I could get married and find the right person and have children. But that's not my story, you know? And when I did get married at 30, it was a huge gift. And we did start having children right away, which was another huge gift. And then I had a miscarriage, and then I had 2 more miscarriages, and then I had a really difficult pregnancy and another beautiful boy after that. And I think in encompassing all of that, to me, is a really good picture of motherhood. It's not for the faint of heart. It is hard and beautiful and full of ups and downs, but all of that is what makes up the motherhood experience for me. We can put a lot of pressure on ourselves as moms, whether that's like moms to your own children or that role of spiritual motherhood for others. We put a lot of high expectations on ourselves, but in the midst of that, we have to be real about who we are. And it takes a certain kind of courage to be humble and to admit your frailty and your weakness and the things that make you imperfect, but God meets us in that place. And it's such a beautiful thing to be able to receive the gift of motherhood in all of our imperfections. Women are the bringers of life, you know, and that's something that God has given us that is so unique and so beautiful. And so whether those are your physical children or not, like, we all are called to bring forth life. And so I recognize that even the word motherhood itself can be a trigger, because there's people that want to be moms and they can't, or there's people that have been really hurt and wounded by their moms, or there's people that have lost their moms. But in the midst of that, I want to encourage women that motherhood is about bringing forth life, and it's about nurturing life. And we want to do that for our little humans, but we also want to do that for the world around us.
God on a tree, nailed for me. God set us free. He died for me, for you and me. Yeah. Now we can see the greatness of His calling. We can find a mercy like the morning. We can know the fullness of His love for us. That's the beauty of the cross. God made
Today I want to talk about something that really sets us apart as people of faith. And it's this idea of the value of strength, but also the value of weakness. And so today we're going to look at is some of the core values of Christianity fly in the face of that in some really interesting ways, especially in the writings of the guy who wrote half the New Testament, the Apostle Paul. And so we're going to look at this today. What is the value of weakness, if there is any? And what do you feel, I was going to say think, but what do you feel about being seen as weak? 1 Corinthians chapter 1, and we're going to look at the upside down teaching that Paul brings to us, the Apostle Paul, who he himself had a lot of credentials, very smart, very well educated. He was both a Roman citizen and a religious leader in the Jewish community. He had all of that going for him. And yet, here he goes, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles, but to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. Brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many of you were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. And God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. So like I said, the Apostle Paul is pretty impressive. I mean, he's single-handedly shaping the beginnings of this new thing called the Christian church, and that's no small task. And so he's going around from place to place in the ancient world, launching churches and teaching about Jesus, and it's impressive. But as he leaves a place, there's other people that rise up behind him who are dividing the churches that he plants. They're taking disciples who are following after Jesus because of Paul's teaching, and they're peeling them off and taking them and making them disciples of themselves. And they're doing so with a lot of charisma and a lot of impressive things. They talk about the miracles that they can perform and the visions that they've had. These are impressive people enough to where Paul actually calls them super apostles. So these super apostles, and so Paul is responding to this division that's happening in specifically this church in Corinth, where these people are showing off and flexing their spirituality in a way that is dividing the church. And so Paul is writing to the church, and he casually mentions how he actually has visions too, and they're actually better than the super apostles. And he's performed miracles too, and he could go on and on about those, but he's not going to boast about that. he got it in there, but he's not going to boast about that. Instead, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, he says, I will boast only about my weaknesses. If I wanted to boast, I would be no fool in doing so because I would be telling the truth, but I won't do it. Because I don't want anyone to give me credit beyond what they can see in my life or hear in my message, even though I have received such wonderful revelations from God. So, to keep me from becoming proud, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me and keep me from becoming proud. 3 different times, I begged the Lord to take it away. And each time he said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. That's the ideal setting for the power of God to be displayed, is your weakness. So now I'm glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults and hardships and persecutions and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Isn't that beautiful? So Paul takes what is a tense situation where everyone's trying to outdo themselves and show off their strength and prove that they have more power than whoever's next to them. And Paul comes and he flips it on its head and he says, here's what I'm going to boast in. Here's what I'm going to choose to be most proud of in my life. It's the weaknesses that I face that won't go away, that actually become a platform for the power of God to do its best work. Paul is so convinced that this is how God works. And by the way, he can use our strengths, and that's great. Like, you know, I hope there's some kind of skill set in my life that has brought me here. I mean, you know, I hope that through my strengths, God can do something. I think he does. But what Paul says is that's all fine and good, but where the real stuff, the real supernatural work happens is when you're allowing your vulnerability to be a vessel that's filled with his grace. That's when the real power, that's when salvation comes, is through our brokenness, my goodness. And so this is what he boasts in. He brags about it. You know, I'm thinking about all the things I'm bad at in life. Do I brag about them? Like, I'm terrible at soccer, but you don't hear me bragging about it. You know, well, that doesn't make any sense. Of course we boast in the things that we're proud of, and we hide the things that we're not. And yet Paul says, in this faith, following this Jesus, it changes. Because who is Jesus? Well, he's a miracle worker, and he's a powerful teacher, and he shakes things up, and he's all those things. But actually the Jesus that Paul taught about in worship was Jesus on a cross, wounded and broken and humiliated and vulnerable. And it's really hard to boast in my strengths when I'm standing beneath the cross, looking at a broken Savior. And then all of a sudden it starts to click that actually God breaks open that which he wants to use to display his power. And through this past year and a half or so, I've thought many times, I don't know if I have what it takes. I don't know if I'm adequate. And then we get through 2020 and everyone's like, high five, we made it through 2020. 2021's gonna be the year we hope for. And then we get this cancer diagnosis with my wife. And I think, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if what's in me is enough to do the task that I've been thrown into. I don't know. And then 2 weeks ago, it was Saturday night, I remember, because church was the next morning. And so I go to bed on Saturday night, and I have this dream early Sunday morning. I remember the time because I woke up in the middle of this dream. It was before 5 o'clock, and I have this dream. And in this dream, it was like, did you ever watch those like 1970s Jesus films? You know, where everyone's in like these really clean pressed tunics, and Jesus has a blue sash and long highlighted hair, you know, curly. I was in that scene, like I was in that setting. It was like a deserty, there's a river over here. I'm on the banks of the river, and there's this hill here, and I'm all by myself in this dream. And as I'm standing there, around comes the corner, all by himself is Jesus. And like I said, curly hair, blue sash, the whole deal. And he walks up to me, and it was so quick and so simple what he did, but he took his hands and he put them on my shoulders, and he said 3 words in this dream. He said, all is forgiven. And I woke up. And so I sit straight up in bed, and I'm so moved by this dream. Now, whether it was, you know, God speaking directly to me or just, you know, anxieties in my own mind, and I had this dream, I don't care. I just know that God used that moment in that dream to really minister to me, because here's the thing. I know I'm a sinner. I know I need grace and forgiveness for my sin. But what I realized when I woke up from that dream is that when I heard those words in my dream, all is forgiven, it wasn't just for the sins that I've committed. It was for the failures and inadequacies that I feel. That when I'm not sure if I can be the husband or the father or the pastor that I have to be, when I gotta show up, but I know where I've failed. I know when I can't do it. I know where my weaknesses are and when my mistakes are there, and I see my failures and I look at myself. And by the way, you see me and others of us at our most together up here, right? I so appreciate when people are like, man, I appreciate your vulnerability up there. I'm like, yeah, that's vulnerability to a level, but man, we are the most put together we can possibly be on a Sunday morning. I know me. When the lights go off and we all go home, and I know me. And I look at that and I say, I don't know if I've got what it takes. My grace is all you need. My power is not just barely able to work in your weaknesses and your failures. My power works best in them. And so Jesus comes to each of us, wherever we feel inadequate, wherever we feel less than what is needed. He puts his hands on our shoulders and he says, all is forgiven. And I'll tell you what, I've been there. Maybe you're there right now, where your prayers look a lot like a desperate cry that God would please do something. And the circumstance doesn't change, and that weakness in you doesn't go away. And we go back and we say, why? Here is the beautiful news about the gospel today, is that Jesus responds with the words that he gave to Paul. My grace is all you need. It's all sufficient. It's got enough. It's got enough to cover over that weakness, and not just cover over it, but use it and transform it and display the great grace and power of God through it. When I was 5 years old, we had a family reunion. And we did one of those human pyramids, with all the cousins. And Grandma, how many cousins do I have? Is it like 18, 19 cousins? 18 cousins. It's nice to have your grandma here. She knows everything. We had a lot of them at this family reunion. And so we were forming this human pyramid. I was one of the younger ones, so I was at the very top. And then after the picture, the pyramid, everyone kind of scatters. And so the pyramid did this. And I ended up in the middle on the bottom of this heap of cousins. And we have a video of it. And at the end of the photo, we all get up and everyone runs away, and you can see it. I start to limp. I'm 5 years old. I limp away from the pile. Do you know, for over 5 years after that, I walked and ran with a limp? I wasn't hurt, didn't feel bad, but I limped. Now, it was probably pretty obvious to everyone else. I had no idea. So we're watching family videos years later. I'm like, why am I limping? Oh, that was just how you walked, son. Oh, cool. Thanks for letting me know. Physical therapy wasn't a thing back in the 90s? Okay, whatever. Here's the thing. Usually when we have a limp, it's not news to those around us. So maybe we have to, really get honest and work up all this vulnerability. And then we go to our coworkers and be like, listen, I have an anger issue. And they're like, yeah, we know. Or you go to your spouse and I just, this is what I'm dealing with. And your spouse says, yeah, you're just now figuring that out, because the weakness is rarely news to those that know us the best. And so what a gift it is when actually we become honest with God and self-aware enough to recognize those vulnerabilities and open up, because that builds trust when we embrace our limp. And that doesn't sound good. I mean, none of this sounds good. Weakness, walking with a limp, being less than the perfect picture of strength. I don't know if that sounds great. Paul didn't know either. But when he realized that weakness was something that was going to be with him, he allowed the grace of God to fill that space. And that's what I want for us. For all of us who have struggled under the weight of a Christianity that has demanded perfection or the pursuit of it, this is a gift. That God shows up in our weaknesses, it's a gift. That in your failures, he's present, not angry, but sufficient. It's a gift. So this is a hand extended towards you from God today. Especially for those who've been so ashamed because you feel like you don't measure up. This is his extended hand and his hand on your shoulders. Say, my grace is all you need. So if you would just close your eyes and bow your heads wherever you're at, here in the room or watching from a distance. What a great grace we've been given, and what a powerful thing when the world is witness to weakened, vulnerable people who live in the grace and the power of God. If you're here in the room and you still feel that weight of shame because of failures or inadequacies or weaknesses or mistakes in your life, today Jesus would just say, his grace is sufficient. It's enough for you. It does all the heavy lifting today. And if you need just a replacement of that shame with his grace and his power made perfect in your weakness, would you be bold enough with your eyes closed, head bowed? Would you be bold enough just to raise your hand and say, I need grace today to cover my shame, to work through my weaknesses? Yeah, hands all over. Jesus, do your best work now. Do your best work now.
What now? You have lots of options. You can stand up and you can just walk out of the room, pretend nothing ever happened. You could get up and brew that cup of coffee that you've been thinking about this entire time, which, by the way, I would highly recommend that you do no matter what. You can think about love differently. You can begin to apply some of these principles to your daily life. You can offer forgiveness to someone that maybe you've been withholding it from. And even more than that, for some of us, maybe this is the beginning of a new journey with Jesus. Now, how do we do that? We think it's really, really simple. Right now in this moment, you can just tell God, I want to follow you. You don't have to have everything together or everything perfectly understood, but that's all it takes to start this journey right now.